All right. Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Iowa Learning Farms Conservation webinar. Spring break week here at Iowa State University. And it kind of looks like spring outside now after the weather we've had the last few days. Um, and it's a great time to talk about cover crops and think about weed control for cover crops. And we're really fortunate to have Dr. Debalin Sarangi from the University of Minnesota. He's an assistant professor and extension weed scientist there, and he's going to talk to us today about cereal rye cover crops for weed control, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As always, if you have questions, please type those in the chat box and we will get those to Dr. Sarangi at the end of the talk. With that, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Matt and Elena, for inviting me for this presentation. And yeah, it might be spring for you. Our temperature is definitely close to 40s today, but we still have snow cover on the ground because we got more than a feet snow last weekend. So we are still dealing with the snow. So let's start this presentation on this cereal rye cover crop because um, I'm a weed scientist by training. And when I came to Minnesota in 2020, I came to know from our farmers that there is a big interest among them for growing some cover crops for covering the ground, especially for weed control, but there are not much local data. So that's where it started. So I'm going to kind of show you the summary of all the research done by our group as well as some of my colleagues. And this presentation is not at all the against cover crop presentation. It is more about like fit for the purpose. If you have the fit for the purpose, go for this cover crop. It is basically that idea. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge the group of my team. They're doing all those amazing work that I'm presenting in front of you, and also the supporter, because my program is heavily supported by our state groups, including Minnesota Department of Agriculture, our stakeholders group, corn growers, soybean growers, as well as the national groups for the stakeholders, and also our farmers and agronomists, because without their help and support, I cannot present the data in front of you. Plus the chemical industry, because they're big supporter of my program. We do a lot of herbicide testing, so they're also they should be acknowledged for funding this project. So I'll start this presentation with a picture of a soybean field in Renville County, Minnesota. So I took this picture in 2022, and since then, every year I go into some of the fields, they look exactly same, where you have a lot of water hemp escapes. So water hemp is number one weed in Minnesota, just like Iowa. And also we have some other species like giant ragweed, lamb's quarter. If you go to northern part, you'll find some kochia. But yeah, water hemp is our number one problem. So in 2020 and 2021, our group, my students, he surveyed some water hemp population across the Minnesota. And this is the summary of that screening for resistance for water hemp. So if you look at this graph, on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, we have number of populations, those are resistant. And on the x-axis, we have all the herbicide those populations are resistant to. So just to break it down, the green bar is showing 25 populations, and 25 populations out of 90 populations that we tested, 25 of them were resistant to Raptor and Roundup. So imazamox is Raptor and glyphosate means Roundup. So now I want to draw your attention in the middle here. So there are four populations. Those who are resistant to Raptor, Roundup, Atrazine, Flexter, Callisto, and List 1. And so there was two populations. Another two populations were resistant to all those, including dicamba. So that means the only option left for management of this for population is the liberty. So glufosinate is the only choice for post-emergence control of these populations. And if you're wondering where these populations are coming from, this map of Minnesota that shows the multiple herbicide resistant populations. So if it is green or purple or yellow, you still have some options to control them. But when you go to the orange or red, those are like five-way or six-way resistant population. And you can see they are mostly distributed in the southern part of the Minnesota. Okay, so I told you for that thing, like only the Liberty was the option for some of the populations from Minnesota. So we are giving the constant warning to the farmers that, hey, don't break this option because you're running out of herbicide choices. And still, we see this picture. This is from 2025. I went to a couple of the farmers' field, and the plants are looking like this. Maybe they are 1 or 2 feet tall water hemp. They sprayed with Liberty. And if you are familiar with Liberty, if you spray on a tall growing plants, you just injure them. You'll not kill them. So this is not a good practices. And then this unfortunate news came. So in 2023, one of our farmers from Dodge County, Minnesota, contacted me and they said, like, Debalin, I'm suspecting my field has liberty resistant water hemp there. So, okay, so we went out and I told the farmer, okay, next year when you plant your corn, can you please spray Liberty and leave some ground, just bare ground, so that we can do some study? So you see this picture. This field was applied with the Liberty 280 at 36 fluid ounces per acre with AMS, 21 days before this picture was taken. And you see those water hemp; those are surviving there. So if you look very closely how those water hemp look like, so you burn the top and those growing points from the bottom, they're just growing back. So that's how we saw this population is behaving when you spray Liberty. So it is resistant because we are doing a lot of greenhouse and field study. So it is resistant, but the thing is you can burn the top, but still you can get the regrowth. So, if you address the herbicide resistance problem with only herbicide, definitely the evolution will win. That's why we need to bring in some other non-herbicide or non-chemical tools for helping our herbicide. I'm not talking about something that you have to take out the herbicide from your system. No. But what I'm telling you is bring something else along with the herbicide so that you can help the herbicide. You don't break these available options. So one of the greatest tool is the cover crops. So the question is why cover crops? Let's talk about the goods, right? And most of the data, most of the information that I'm going to show you that is from Minnesota, and maybe some of the information you can feel that it is also true for Iowa. So, first thing is the reduction in the soil erosion. So, there is a data that shows that in the US, 2.3 megagram per hectare soil is eroded per year. And the highest soil erosion is from corn, soybean, and wheat grounds. And if you put a dollar value, I know it is very hard, but if you put a dollar value, it costs about 44 billion per year for the soil erosion. Okay, let's talk about the nitrogen loss. So this is from our Department of Agriculture data. 158 million pound of nitrogen that leave Minnesota soil to go to the Mississippi River basin. And sometimes in the summer, you'll see some of those ponds with all the green algae because of all the high nitrogen end up in those water. And then if you think about the groundwater contamination, because if you have no plants on the ground during the winter month or in the early spring, those nitrates, free nitrates, that will end up in the groundwater. However, if you have a cover crop that can utilize some of those nitrates, so 1 in 5 Minnesotans, close to 1.2 million people, they rely on the private wells for drinking water in Minnesota. And if I look at the data from 1992 to 2022 on the right hand side, it shows the private well drinking water survey data from our Department of Health. And if you see it is light blue or dark blue, that means those wells are at least one time, those were contaminated with nitrate nitrogen. So that means those wells were detected with nitrate above their permissible limit. And the story is not different for Iowa. If you look at the Iowa data, I was looking online, and from 2002 to 2017, this is the nitrate contamination in private wells data. And you see, it is also distributed across Iowa. So that means that it is a big concern, and maybe cover crop can help you with that. Okay, now let's talk about the vegetation cover, because I told you in the winter month our lands are open. So this is satellite data, and it is kind of like they call it false coloring. They use the false coloring to show you the green vegetation versus the bare ground. So left hand side, this is showing the March and April. You see majority portion of Minnesota and Iowa, those are like open ground, right? And in July, you are growing corn, soybean, and other crops. So it is pretty much green. And in October, when you start harvesting, the ground is becoming yellow or brown. That means the green vegetation is gone. So that means from October until April, we have a period which is our open ground. And this is the missed opportunity for any sort of biomass production, soil erosion, like high soil erosion, high nitrogen leaching, and we have no biomass pretty much. So let's put cover crop in other crops. Look, I was mostly talking about corn and soybean, but in Minnesota, we are number one in sugar beet production. And if you are familiar with sugar beet, the seeds are very tiny, and the plants, when it emerge from the ground, they are very tiny, and it is very expensive seed. So in Minnesota, there is a common practice of planting cover crops either in the fall or in the spring, just to protect those sugar beet plants from the wind exposure. And also it helps with the planter bounce during the sugar beet planting. So that's why if you look at our Minnesota map, I'll show you quickly. There is a area in the across the Red River Valley where you will see more cover crop acreages. So improved weed control. Yeah, that is another good impact of cover crops. So this is from one of our grad students' research. And what I'm showing here is left-hand side, this is the 2022 data. Right-hand side, this is 2023 data. So we terminated the cover crop at soybean planting, and we have different strips for different weed species. And the cover crop termination, it was cereal rye, and it was terminated between May 25 and June 1. Yeah, a little late because we wanted to get some biomass out of that cover crop. So in 2022, we got close to 2,900 pounds per acre. 2023, we got close to 2,200 pounds per acre biomass. And now on the x-axis, we have the weed species, and y-axis, we have the cumulative seedling emergence. So total seedling emergence throughout the season. So if you look at the data, first I'll show you the data for all four broadleaf species, including lamb squatters, common ragweed, giant ragweed, and water hemp. So we saw the positive impact of cover crops. So the seedling emergence reduction was somewhere between 22% to 50% for depending on the species. 2023, all of the species we saw close to 50% reduction in their cumulative seedling emergence. That means for those four broadleaf species there was positive impact from cover crop, and that's why you have the stars, because stars means it is showing that there was significant, statistically significant impact. Now it comes to the when it comes to the woolly cupgrass, one of the grass species that we tested in this research, we saw that was really stunning finding that in cover crop the number of plants emerged, it was higher than the no cover crop situation. So we assume number one, cereal rye is a grass species, maybe it has no impact on the grass weeds in this case, especially for the woolly cup grass. And number two, we thought maybe the cereal rye is conserving the moisture, that is probably promoting more emergence. However, when you put the statistics, there was no difference. Although there were more emergence of woolly cup grass in cover crop versus no cover crop, but there was no difference statistically between those treatments. Okay, so I talked with you about the good things about cover crop. Now you ask me, Devlin, tell me, how is the cover crop adoption in Minnesota? So this is one of our survey. So we had a survey data starting from 2017 up to 2024 in our extension events. We kept asking them, okay, what are the non-chemical tools you are trying for your weed management? So the green line here is the cover crop line. Okay. So if you see since 2020, since I'm sorry, since 2020, the cover crop acreage or the interest among the people is increasing, but it's still under the 20%. So if you look at other things like hand pulling the weeds, that's the yellow line, like close to 40% people are saying we are hand pulling the weeds. However, for the cover crop, it is below 20%. Okay. So if we look at the map for Minnesota, you'll see our cover crop acreage. This is USDA data. Our cover crop acreage is lower than other states in the Midwest, even the eastern part of the United States. And I told you about the Red River Valley. In those Red River Valley, those counties has a little bit higher cover crop acreages because we grow small grains and sugar beet. Those are more, there are more utilization for cover crop in those counties. Okay. And this is the data. This is the data I'm showing, pretty much the summarizing everything like termination timing, termination methods, planting dates, seeding rate. And this is the map where we conducted all the cover crop research from 2020, since I joined 2020 to 2025. It includes the research information from my group and Dr. Anna Kate's group, Dr. Axel Garcia, Y. Garcia's group, and a lot of other groups. So you see, we are conducting some of the on-farm trial, we are conducting some of the on-station trials, and those are the locations in Minnesota. It is like our data is pretty much statewide data, I can call it. Okay, now let's talk about the bat. So we are in Minnesota. We have a shorter growing seasons, especially if you're rotating with your grain corn and soybean. Okay, so this is one of the growing degree days data. So in x-axis, we have different months starting from October until April. Y-axis, we have growing degree days. And this is for growing degree days for cereal rye. How much growing degree days you can accumulate in cereal rye. So in the left hand side, when you plant cereal rye after soybean, so you plant cereal rye after soybean in October, you can get good growing degree days, but you have to plant your corn a little early. So in March and April, you can gain some growing degree days. Now, if you are planting your cereal rye on the right hand side, which is after corn in the fall, you will not gain much or accumulate much growing degree days. However, I assume you are planting soybean after corn, so you will accumulate some growing degree days in the spring from March, April, and May, and then you'll terminate your cereal rice. So shorter growing season is definitely a problem for us. And now the question is the shorter growing season means lower biomass. So the question is how much biomass you need for effective weed control. So I assume, okay, you don't want to use herbicide. You just want to rely on cereal rye for weed control. How much biomass you need from cereal rye? So this is one of my students' data, and he plot all the replicated data, all the weed species, like it includes all the weed species, water hemp, foxtail, lamb's quarter, everything. And he wanted to see, okay, I don't want to spray any pre-emergence at 42 days after 42 days after planting, that is just right before post emergence, how much weed control I'm getting. So if you look at this data, it shows that you need close to 4,500 pounds per acre. So you need to have really good biomass to get a consistent weed control, which is above 90% weed control. Okay. So if I add a pre-emergence to that, okay, I cannot get that 4,500 pounds per acre biomass. What I can do is I can add a pre-emergence herbicide. And now you see that line is pretty consistent, pretty consistent. And even if you get like close to 2,000 pounds per acre biomass, close to 2,000 pounds per biomass, and pre-emergence will give you pretty consistent weed control. Okay, now the question is how to achieve that 4,500 pounds per acre biomass mark. So we played with a couple of the components. One is the seeding rate, cereal rice seeding rate. We have 60, 90, 120 pounds per acre seeding rate, and none of the seeding rate impacted the biomass. Even we have data from 40 pounds, 50 pounds, still didn't impact. When you go as low as 20 or 34 pounds per acre seeding rate, you'll see some inconsistency. That's why we don't recommend going like 20 or 30 pounds per acre. You'll see some inconsistency. But above 40 pounds, we never saw any impact. Like the rye biomass was pretty similar. Now we played with the termination timing. Okay, let's plant soybean, but 7 days before planting, we'll terminate the cover crop. That is 7 dBp. Or we'll terminate at planting. Or we'll terminate at planting and add a pre-emergence, which was our verdict. Verdict is our saflufenacil and zidua. We added verdict at 5 ounces per acre. And also we played with, okay, we'll keep the cereal rye growing 7 days after planting. Let's see what we're gonna get. So those are like planting green type situation. Okay. And also we played with the soybean planting date. Okay. We planted soybean May 15 versus June 1, which is very late. I know, very late, but we wanted to play with that biomass. Okay. What is the data look like? How to get that 4,500 mark. So we can only get 4,500 mark in the late planting scenarios, which is June 1. Early planting scenarios, even if you go with 7 days after planting, which is planting green, you'll not get that thing, that 4,500 mark, which is that red dotted line. So both locations, we conducted this study, only way to get it is delaying the planting, which is probably not a good idea. I would show you. Okay. And this is one of the slide I borrowed from my colleague in Wisconsin. He also found the similar thing. If you want to rely on cereal rye, you need to get 4,500 pounds per acre. And then he wanted to know, okay, if there is a correlation between the height and the biomass. He said you can roughly you can find 30-inch tall cereal rye that will be 4,500 pounds per acre biomass, like roughly 30 inch. If you go and measure it, 30 inch means 4,500, but that's a lot of biomass. Anyways, second question is your pre-emergence hitting the ground? So when there is no cover crop in early planting scenarios, on the spray card, these are the scanned spray card, we got 57% trees that is hitting the ground in a bare ground conditions. Okay. And on the spray card, 27% was hitting the ground when you have some sort of cover crop. Doesn't matter what is your seeding rate. That means some of the pre's are lost on that biomass. And we can discuss whether those pre's will go down with rainfall and all those things. Yes, there is a chance, but like physically, half of the pre's are blocked. Okay, I told you cereal rice seeding rate did not impact the biomass, did not impact weed control or soybean yield. Okay, and now the question is, do you really need 4,500 pounds per acre biomass for weed control? So here I showed you the water hemp control on the y-axis, and x-axis has all those treatments 7 days before planting, at planting with pre, 7 days after planting. So what you see here is that A's means your best treatments. So either you terminate at planting with pre-emergence or you terminate 7 days after planting, you get pretty much similar water hemp control, close to 90%, which were similar to some of the late planting scenarios. Okay. And for the foxtail control, in early planting, when you get close to 2,500 pounds per acre biomass, you'll never get the best foxtail control. So only the late planting scenarios, when you have a lot of biomass, those planting scenarios are giving you the good foxtail control. Okay, soybean yield. I told you probably the late planting is not a good idea, and exactly that's what we saw. Soybean yield was in like consistently low in the late planting scenarios. Early planting is always better. And now in the early planting, we found either you terminate your cereal rye at planting or at planting with pre, they are pretty similar in the yield. Or you keep the cereal rye growing for another week, you still get the similar yield. So that means early planting is needed, and you have to terminate either at planting with pre for the weed control and soybean yield, or you can keep it for another week for getting a little bit better biomass and better weed control. Okay, let's talk about quickly the ugly. So first thing is the inconsistency. This is the USDA NAS data regarding the days suitable for field work in Minnesota. And left hand side, this is 2023, and right hand side, it is the 2024. And this is kind of weekly data for days suitable for field work. And if you see the pink block, those are the area when you do all of your plantings and pre-emergence spraying. 2023, earlier in the season, the days suitable for field work per week was very low, close to like zero point 0.6 days per week. But then when you go into May, your days suitable for work increased up to 4 or 5 days. And in 2024, the thing is like it was pretty inconsistent. In early April, some week it is 4 days, some week it is 1 day, and again it is 5 days. So that means there is very much variability in the days suitability. And one of my farmer quoted, cover crop add complexity to the system, often delay spring field work. Okay, and this is some of our field in Aprils. This is from 2 years back. In April, we had still the snow on the ground. Okay. Next issue is the crop planting issue, establishment issue, and nutrient deficiency. When you go for high biomass, if you don't have a proper equipment, you can plant your seeds on the ground, which is then you'll get inconsistent stand. And this is the picture in soybean. On the right hand side, this is the picture in corn, inconsistent crop establishment. And this is another picture from soybean where this is a typical potassium deficiency due to the cereal rye biomass production in the early season. So moisture depletion, our farmers are very much concerned about the moisture. They're saying, Debalin, okay, you are saying you will get good weed control if you get more biomass, but I will deplete my moisture. Do you have some data to support? Yes, we do have a data. And we have a little bit, like we got positive correlation with moisture depletion and high biomass production, but the correlation is a little weaker because we got 0.2%, 0.2 correlation. But if you still see the line, when you increase the biomass up from starting from 2,000 until 8,000 or 10,000, pounds per acre, which is very high. We got in couple of the replications. You deplete your moisture by 50% with all those high moisture, so high biomass. So finding the balance is very important. Okay, couple of the points I noted down from all the research. Pursuit for high cover crop biomass for weed management often delays the termination, which can reduce the cash crop yield, and particularly if you're in corn system. And higher cover crop biomass is frequently associated with inconsistent crop stand, and cover crops adds cost to the system, so including seed cost, seeding cost, trips, fuel, aerial seeding, so all those costs will be added. Given the risk associated with cover crops in the upper Midwest, participation in some sort of cost share program, it may offset some of those economic uncertainty. Okay, so now you can say, Devlin, you talk about good, bad, and ugly. What is the take home messages for us? Okay, this is my conclusion from all the research from since 2020 until now. Okay, first thing is avoid assuming the functional equivalence of cover crops across region. So you may see a data from Virginia or Maryland, you may get excited, okay, this is very good, but try in your local level, like whether it will work for you or not. So local data is very much important. Cover crops can provide agronomic benefits in the upper Midwest, including weed suppression that we found, but over-promising benefits can undermine the long-term adoption. Cereal rye remains the most reliable cover crop option, especially in Minnesota. The best cover crop is that one works, right? So that's why cereal rye is the best for our environment. And appropriate planting equipment is very much critical, because if you have appropriate planting equipment, you can deal with the moderate or high biomass production. And last comment, there is no one size fits all, especially for the cover crop. So start small, learn what works for your farm, and then you can scale up with confidence. So don't try to cover all of your acreage with cover crop. Maybe start small this year, and then you will learn from that, and you can fine tune your management. So with that, I'll just stop here, and thank you so much. And I think we have some time for questions.
Yep, we got time for questions, so folks, feel free to type in your questions. We can go through those next few slides here.
Sure.
Um, Want to acknowledge the key partners in making the conservation webinar series possible. The Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture. These webinars would not be possible without their support, specifically financial support, to make these happen. Um, Elena's time is valuable, so to help organize. All right, let's go to the next slide, which should be, if you watch this webinar live and are wanting to earn a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, ALENAW at iastate.edu. Next slide, please. If you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we'd greatly appreciate that. Only one survey response is needed for all 2026 webinars. So if you've done that, thank you so very much. If you're willing, you can scan that QR code or go to the link there, iowalearningfarms.org/survey. Let's go to the next slide, which should be, we're going to talk cover crops again next week, and we're going to our new format. I'm going to have a chat with Dr. Allison Robertson, that's a professor and field crops extension pathologist, a plant pathologist, and we're going to talk about cover crops beyond the basics. So similar to like Dr. Mark Licht and I did last month, we're going to do that with Allison next week. So really looking forward to that. Tune in and get your questions ready. Okay, next slide. This webinar and all others are archived, so you can find that on the Iowa Learning Farms website or our YouTube channel dedicated just to webinars. I don't know if there's another slide at all there. I don't think so. I think we're done. Okay. Oh, nope. I thought there might be. Okay. So, a week from tomorrow, impacts of restoring wetlands for nutrient reduction. So, Dr. Grace or Dr. Charlie, so I saw Grace Jackson there, but Dr. Charlie Lowen will be talking about some of the work he's been doing with wetlands. So, please tune in next week on Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Time for that. And Wednesday, tune in to Dr. Allison Robertson and myself talking cover crops. Okay, let's go. Um, uh, let's get to some of these questions here. And so let's first, we got some, okay. Um, the first question we have here is why do you have different growing degree days for cover crop between corn and soybean? Oh, I think you're muted. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm sorry about it.
No, no.
So that's a very good question. So why we have different growing degree days between corn after soybean system? So one thing is when you are planting your cover crops, because that data I showed you that showed the cover crop which is planted after corn or soybean harvest. So if you think about soybean harvesting time in Minnesota, it is typically happens like late, very late September, early October. So you then plant right after that. So you get a little bit growing degree days there. Whereas where you harvest your corn, sometimes we harvest our corn in early November. So you don't have much time there in the fall for the accumulation of growing degree days. However, in the spring, that's common practice that we plant our corn first, then soybean. So soybean is planted around May 10, May 15, whereas corn is planted like late April, early May. So in the spring, before soybean, you'll get more growing degree days versus soybean. So versus corn. I'm sorry. So that means it is more regarding the harvesting time of the previous crop and planting time of the next crop.
Yeah. Um, have you done any testing with brassicas or legumes as cover crops?
So that's another good question. So in our lab, last fall, we planted some mixture with some brassica and legume. Um, I would say in the fall the establishment was good, but we didn't get much biomass. I have to go back and look at the data, but most of my experience is working with cereal rye. But I talked to my colleagues who has a little bit more experience than me to growing some cover crops, and they told me that cereal rye is the best cover crop for Minnesota environment. So yes, maybe you can get some benefit with diversifying the cover crops, but again, you have to remember it will add the cost. So you have to think how much benefits you are getting out of those mixture. So
Yes.
I'm not opposing this idea, but I don't have much experience on that.
Yeah, I guess a lot of those may not overwinter. Would you expect any weed control benefits if you have something that doesn't overwinter?
Sometimes people say that if they don't overwinter, you can get some suppression in the fall, especially
Okay.
like if you have marestel, if you have pennycress. But again, if those weeds they germinate in the fall, in the spring, they will just take over because there is no biomass to cover those winter annuals. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean in Minnesota, realistically, not much benefits
Okay.
we have seen so far.
Okay. Um, would there, I guess, if this might be a little outside of your wheelhouse, probably is, but any any tips or things people need to be considering it with planters if they have a lot of cover crop biomass out there?
Yeah, that's a very good question because we are also learning that thing. Every year we plant, and some year it is a failure, some year it is a success. So I'm not a equipment specialist, but I would say what we saw the success is you have to have a good no-till planter, maybe a little bit heavier side. And number two is if you can cut through that biomass and open that thing and plant it, I think that's the best way of doing it because I remember like 2021, we planted cover crop first time in our group. And then 2022, there are a couple of the fields, those were total failure because we didn't have right planters. So we are learning over the time. But what we learned is spending a little bit money on no-till planter with a ability so that you can cut through that biomass and open
Okay.
it. I think that helps.
Okay.
But I'm
Great.
no equipment
Yeah.
expert. I know maybe, yeah, there are people who knows more than
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, yeah, much better than I could have done. So nice. Okay. Here's one thinking a little beyond our corn soybean rotation, but I think is an interesting one. Um, so the question was weed control impact of eliminating soybeans from the rotation and instead using cover crops followed by a summer annual mix that is harvested multiple times for forage. And then switching, so it'd be a corn, then cover crop and summer annual forage mix there.
Can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, they were wondering if what you thought if there would be any weed control impact of switching from, from that corn soybean rotation to a corn cover crop summer annual rotation where that summer annual is chopped or grazed, I guess.
So that's very good question. And I know like from Iowa State, there are plenty of data that showed that when you switch from corn soybean rotation to little more diverse rotation, you'll see the benefit on the weed control side, especially if you include alfalfa or like some sort of annual forage that you harvest a couple times. So there are like enough data to support that thing from Iowa State. Now, uh, if I tell this thing to my farmers, I think most of them may not agree with me because the farming practices is driven by the economics, right? So I know the corn soybean price is not as good as like in the past, but still like it's still economically viable option. So to have a new crop a new system in the landscape, it requires a lot of research data, lot of extension effort, and lot of on-farm trials. And I don't know if both of our states we have done enough to do that, but I'm pretty sure as a scientist, as a university specialist, we are constantly pushing for diversity and thing. But I think it is very complex. But answering the question that whether diversification will help with the weed management, yes.
Okay.
That's the straightforward answer. Yes, and there are enough data to support that.
Okay. Um, oh, forgot this one. Sorry. Any difficulty being able to terminate the cereal rye?
That's a good question. I didn't show you, but we have a data of serial right termination options. So we tried all sorts of option, including some non-chemical options like mowing, baling.
Hmm.
We tried all those things, even the roller crimper. We tried all sorts of options. So I can tell you, if you're looking for chemical options, Roundup is still the best option because we tried with some PPOs, even with paraquat. We tried with some PPOs like Reviton, Saflufenil, like Sharpen, but Roundup is the best option. So when
Okay.
you throw Roundup with something else, good control. Even we tried those Group One like Select Max and Fusilade, but Roundup is still the best option.
Okay.
Now, non-chemical options, actually, there are some interest. So non-chemical options, we found if you're doing the roller crimping, you probably need to wait until the boot stage. You need
Yeah.
to keep them growing because that if you do the roller crimper without your Roundup application, the plants may grow back if you do it too early. So
Yeah.
you have to wait until the boot stage. Then the stem will be brittle. You can roller crimp it and you can break the stem. They will not grow back.
Yeah.
So that's roller crimper. And then the tillage and baling, what we found is baling too early is not good option because you mow them and take the biomass off or something, or even you can put the biomass there by mowing, but those plants will grow back in the tillering stage. So maybe let them go to that stem elongation phase when they're like growing out of the ground. Then you can do the mowing, you'll get a good success. And tillage is kind of hit and miss for us. So we kind of did tillage. Sometimes they are in the big clod and they get established again with a splash of rain or something. So tillage was kind of hit and miss. But still, I would say if you wait until the stem elongation phase, not the tillering phase, elongation phase, you can have success with tillering and mowing.
Okay. All right. I think, Devlin, that got to our questions. This is really useful, super timely as people that might have cover crops and are thinking about termination this spring. And we're going to be talking a lot more about cover crops through this conservation webinar series with Allison Robertson. And then I think in April, we'll have Dr. Wesley Everman, that's also a weed scientist at Iowa State University, with a chat with him as well. So, again, if folks need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Tune in next week for our chat with Dr. Allison Robertson on Wednesday, and then Charlie Lowen and his group on Thursday talking about wetlands. With that, thank you so much for a great presentation. I hope everybody has a great day today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you all.